the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, one God. One of the most impressive periods in missionary history, and subsequently one of the most amazing flourishing of saints, almost never happened. To put you in the kind of historical context, we are in the early 600s in the north of what would later become England. And if you read the ecclesiastical history of the English people by St. Bede, one of the most famous stories is of the conversion of King Edwin by Paulinus, one of the Roman missionaries. Paulinus was based out of York, to the south of where King Edwin was based. He was king of Dara, which was basically the coast region of northern England, south of what is today Newcastle. And that story is an impressive and memorable one. Paulinus comes, and Edwin is gathered together with his thanes, with his aldermen, as it were, in the lodge. And Paulinus preaches to these Anglo-Saxons for some time, and eventually Edwin has to make a decision whether to accept or not this faith of Christ. And he asks his aldermen, should we accept this or no? And famously, one of his guides of thanes gets up and says, well, King, we don't know anything about what comes before or after. It's like a swallow that is flying out in the storms and the dark and night of this world, flies in through one window of this lodge and flies into the light where the warmth is, and then flies out again by another window. And if this new teaching, he says, teaches us anything about what came before or what comes after, we should receive it. And from that point forward, Edwin was resolved to become a Christian, the first Christian king in England. And it doesn't end there, though, and this is where our story picks up today, because Edwin, king of Dara, he gets his sister to be engaged, married to the king Ethelfrith, who is king of Bernicia, which is the coastal land of northern England stretching north of what is today Newcastle, so north of Tyne, and we are all the way up into the Scottish borders, nearly as far as the Forth River. And for a time, Edwin manages to secure this united kingdom of Dara and Bernicia. He calls it Northumbria. And it seems like Christianity is beginning to spread in this land. And yet, after only a few short years, comes Penda, king of the Mercians, a pagan who throws his lot in with Cadwallon, who is the king of Wales, ostensibly a Christian. You should read what Bede says about Cadwallon, about being a Christian in name only, no more vicious and horrible and oppressive ruler ever there was, according to Bede. But Cadwallon and Penda together come, and they overrun and destroy this nascent Christian kingdom in the north of England. Now, Edwin's nephew, Oswald, flees to Scotland and spends some time there. He ends up on Iona. And on that holy island, which had been founded as a Christian monastery by Colmcille or Columba, who'd come from Derry in the north of Ireland, became a place of great education and learning for Oswald. He didn't resolve to become a monk himself, but he took the learning he received from those monks and decided he would go back and try to re-establish what his uncle Edwin had begun in the kingdom of Northumbria, now broken up again into petty little pagan kingdoms. And so around the year 634, 635, Oswald goes back. And then he summons the monks of Iona to come and help him with this missionary enterprise. And they choose from among them one Corman, make him a bishop. He goes off with 12 disciples to help King Oswald in this work, this missionary endeavor. Well, after a few months, Corman and his disciples come back to Iona. They throw their hands up and say, it's pointless. We shouldn't even bother. Never have we met more stubborn and hard-hearted people. they will never receive the gospel. Let's just give up on this enterprise now. We liked Oswald, but it's a foolhardy idea. Let's do nothing about this. Well, one of the younger monks of Iona at that point tentatively puts up his hand and says, maybe you went about it the wrong way. What if instead of bringing an abrasive and harsh message, what if instead of confronting these people directly, you approach them with gentleness? What about humility? What about compassion? Maybe they need the gentle milk of doctrine before they can take solid food. Well, when you suggest things like that, you're likely to get appointed, right? And so that young monk Aidan was sent to help Oswald. And so he arrives in the year 635, and Oswald is delighted. He gives Aidan 1,000 acres of land. Happens to be on a tidal island right near the royal seat that Oswald had chosen at Bamberg. This tidal island where twice a day it is joined to the land by a causeway and twice a day cut off into a place of seclusion. Still today, you can go and visit Lindisfarne, Holy Island, and although the causeway today is tarmacked, it still does completely flood over. There's a life station halfway along, because to this day people get caught out as they walk backwards and forwards, and they sometimes have to climb this ladder to sit in a booth for a few hours to wait out the time. But it's there that Aidan begins his missionary endeavors. He founds a monastery there. And he brings people from the surrounding lands to educate them, young boys and men, in order to train them up to be the monks who will carry the gospel to the world around. And he does indeed go about it in a completely different way from that of Cornwall. He decides to treat people as equals. He's offered every gift imaginable by Oswald, and then eventually when Oswald dies, by his brother Oswin, both of whom are recognized as saints in that early church. But even when given the finest horse in the land to help him with his missionary endeavors, what Aidan does, he gives it away at the first opportunity to a beggar that he meets. He doesn't want to travel around on horseback because that's how you lord it over people. That's how you demonstrate power and authority. That's how you oppress people. He wanted to be on the same level with all the people around. He went out not only on foot, but barefoot and traveled, even though that was far more dangerous a way to travel in those days. And education and love and support for the poor were the hallmarks of his missionary work. Now, by the time he dies in 651, the land has been converted to Christianity. Before I say more about what kind of mission that was, we should note that he dies on the 31st of August. It's why we celebrate him today. And it is completely coincidentally the last day of the church year. In other words, the day before the new church year, liturgical year, begins on the 1st of September. And that, of course, is only, and rather improbably, down to the fact that it was the first day of the Byzantine and before that Roman tax year. That's how our church calendar got formed. So all this is rather coincidental. And that day, that first day of September, has long been recognized not only as the first day of the liturgical year, but in some ways a kind of symbolic beginning of creation. In the Holy Byzantine Empire, the 1st of September was celebrated as the day God created the cosmos. And over the last 30 years, since the enthronement of His All Holiness Patriarch Bartholomew of Constantinople, this has become a day to celebrate not just the beginning of creation, but the environment, the world around us, the cosmos, ecology, and protect the environment. And this has lent credence to Patriarch Bartholomew being called over the last few decades the Green Patron. And he's proposed this as a commemoration not just for Orthodox, but for all Christians. And for the last 3 decades, this has now been the season of creation. But it has to be said, it's the non-Orthodox who've taken to this with a little bit more gusto. Today, in many Roman Catholic and Anglican and Lutheran and other churches, this season of creation is deeply appreciated and celebrated. Hymns and celebrations over weeks for the whole month of September. Commemoration of the fact that we ought to look after the world around us. All of that to say that despite this happenstance coming together of the feast of St. Aidan on the 31st of August, because it is indeed his day of death, his day of resurrection into the life of the age to come, and this 1st of September, this day of creation, there's much to be made of the connection between his mission and precisely what Patriarch Bartholomew intended by proposing a season of creation. Because the entirety of this gentle mission, this mission was in complete contradistinction to the mission of the one who went before him, ever so briefly, Corman of Iona. Aidan's mission is one about creation spirituality. Now, so often we reduce that today to simply that kind of political effort, that political football even that gets punted around between different parties. And some people lend credence to it, and others, of course, want to focus on other things like economic growth and business and so forth. So how do we make sense of what creation spirituality is all about? We ought to look precisely at this mission of Aidan, the one who walked gently on the earth, the one who on his island, his holy island of Lindisfarne, was at peace with the world around him, was known to celebrate that aspect of Celtic and Irish spirituality, of that kind of harmony of the cosmos, harmony of all creation. There was this Irish term, Carad nam Behir, which means the friendship of all creatures, merely the fellowship or communion of all creatures, from the seabirds to the land creatures, to the fish of the sea, to the whole world around, recognizing in a figure like Aidan one who was like Adam before the fall in Eden, walking gently in the garden. That's what it means to live a life that is gospel-centered. It's not about political programs or projects. It's not about arguments in the political sphere. It's about how we return to the life we were called to live as human beings, reflecting the glory of God to the world and gathering up the praise and thanksgiving of the created order around us, living in harmony with all creatures. And that harmony has something to do with a kind of fundamental justice. And what's telling is that this year's season of creation, as it's celebrated, as I say, with a lot more enthusiasm, sadly, outside of Orthodox Church, even though we're the ones who proposed it, and it's our feast and our church new year that it's based on. The theme this year is taken from Isaiah chapter 32. And Isaiah 32 is this prophetic vision of the world being restored after a time of desolation, after a time when that harmony, when that glorious friendship of creatures, right? The Karad nam Behir, the Irish called it. That friendship and fellowship of all creatures is disrupted, where that's broken down. And what will happen? God will intervene to restore it. But it's a restoration that's not simply based, as I say, on some political action program in fighting pollution or climate change. It's fundamentally rooted in the gospel, much deeper than all of those things, in a restoration of cosmic justice. Listen to the theme this year from Isaiah chapter 32. For the palace will be forsaken, the prophet says, the populous city deserted. The hill and the watchtower will become dens forever. The joy of wild asses a pasture for flocks, until a spirit from on high is poured out on us, and the wilderness becomes a fruitful field, and the fruitful field is deemed a forest. Then justice will dwell in the wilderness, and righteousness abide in the fruitful field. The effect of righteousness will be peace, and the result of righteousness, quietness and trust forever. My people will abide in a peaceful habitation, in secure dwellings, and in quiet resting places. This glorious image of the restoration of all creation, of all plant life and animal life and human life, working together and living together in harmony. And it can only come about, the prophet Isaiah says, when the Spirit of God's justice is poured out. The effect of righteousness, he says, will be peace. This is what Aidan lived, by gently treading on this earth, by living in harmony with all creation, by calling the very witness of nature itself as a witness to the gospel, so that all the peoples of Northumbria, in that restored united kingdom of Dara and Bernicia, would accept the faith of Christ. And over the next century after that mission, it's an incredible outpouring of the Spirit. It's an incredible bestowal of peace and harmony. And how many countless saints emerge during this period? Oswald himself and Oswald, Finan and Coleman of Lindisfarne, Cuthbert and Wilfrid, Hilda of Whitby, whose chapel is right here, and the school named after her right next door, one of the patrons of Trinity College. Also Cadman and Bede himself, and not least, of course, Geoffrey of Wearmouth and Yarrow himself. I want to leave you with a little verse that is attributed to Aidan of Lindisfarne, that gets us to the core of how he goes about that missionary work. Because, of course, he'd established himself on this tidal island. And he uses that image, that metaphor, the symbol of a tidal island, to make sense of how it is we can live in this world, but not be of it in terms of this passing away age. Not to bow down before the princes and kings of this age. And no, the kings that he faced were Christian kings. They were even sainted kings. And yet still he stood up to them and always fought on the side of the wider created world and those who were marginalized and poor. But as he uses this image of the tidal island, listen to how today we too might take from this creation spirituality and missionary endeavor. He writes, "Leave me alone with God as much as may be. As the tide draws the waters close in upon the shore, make me an island set apart, alone with you, God, holy to you. Then with the turning of the tide, prepare me to carry your presence to the busy world beyond, the world that rushes in on me, till the waters come again and fold me back to you.